with what is happening now and what has happened. And yes, the Democrats cave. I'm going to start calling them Flintstone because they love caves. But this is what this country voted for. And too many times, this country never bears the consequences of its actions. It's always saved from itself. I remember when, right after COVID, people were talking about inflation's too high. Inflation was a worldwide phenomenon. It was everywhere. If it was a matter of policy, then it would just happen here. It happened everywhere. But it was lower here and dissipated here faster than anybody else because of governance. It happened so fast and dissipated so fast that people forgot. And now they decided that they would rather make a decision because the eggs were too high. They can't afford eggs. They couldn't afford eggs, and now they can't afford Aetna. You voted for all this. And if you didn't vote for all this, you sat home and decided that nothing would be different. And now it is. And too many times, people are saved from their consequences. They never have to bear the consequences of their actions. Ever. How many times have the Republicans dashed this economy only to be saved by Democrats and then forget that it happened? Statistically true. This is not even just me. Democrats create more jobs, save more economies, from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama. But then you forget, and you decided you wanted to own the libs, you wanted to show people, you wanted a vessel for your anger. And now you very well may not be able to afford for the reality you've created. And as bad as I feel for you, I think that sometimes you need to bear the consequences of your actions. Too many times you're saved from yourself. This is it. The rubber meets the road. Now you will get to see what it's like. As hard as people might have fought, and yes, they caved, but the Supreme Court was going to help them. The both houses were going to help them. This was going to happen. So now when you can't afford your premiums, your jobs are gone, and you're starving, this is what you voted for. Or this is what you didn't vote for. I don't know how many times people say nothing ever changes. Well, this time something did. Something changed. And now you will actually get to see what it's like to live with the consequences of your actions. And as bad as I feel bad for you, as bad as I feel and hard as people worked and tried not to make it happen, you decided it. You decided it would happen. So rubber, meet the road.
Have you ever noticed how sometimes the very people cheering the loudest for a cause end up getting hurt by it the most? Stick around till the end, because this story about D.L. Hughley, Donald Trump, and the sudden snap shutdown shows exactly how that can happen in America today. And trust me, what you'll hear by the time we finish will have you thinking twice about who really pays the price when politics becomes a game. Reporting started with a quiet notice on the U.S. Department of Agriculture website. Most people missed it at first. It looked like just another government update. But tucked between bureaucratic lines was a sentence that changed the lives of millions. There would be no SNAP benefits issued in November. Food stamps, the essential safety net that keeps food on the table for countless families, were gone, at least for now. The reason? The government shutdown had gone on too long, and neither party in Washington could agree on a budget. The well had run dry. While politicians pointed fingers, ordinary Americans felt panic setting in. Some rushed to grocery stores, unsure how they'd feed their kids. Others went online searching for updates, hoping the government would fix it before the first of the month. USDA statement even blamed Senate Democrats for the situation, claiming they'd voted 12 times not to fund the program. But as always, there were two sides to the story. And in the middle of it all, comedian and activist D.L. Hugley wasn't having it. If you've followed D.L. for any length of time, you know he's never afraid to speak his mind. He's sharp, funny, but also painfully honest about what's wrong with the system. And when news broke that millions of families might lose their food benefits, he went online and dropped one of the most talked about posts of the week. His target? Not just the government, but the same MAGA supporters who helped bring this leadership into power. DL looked straight into the camera and said what many were thinking, but few had the nerve to say out loud. He pointed out that Trump's own supporters, many of whom rely on SNAP and heating subsidies, would be among the hardest hit. With his trademark tone, half sarcasm, half truth, he told them that if they voted out of hate, they might soon have to fill their bellies with hate too. It was brutal, it was bold, and it hit home. Don't go anywhere, because in just a moment, we'll get into exactly why he said that and how the numbers prove him right. You see, statistics show that white Americans make up around 37% of all SNAP users. That's more than any other group. Black Americans make up about 26% and Hispanic Americans 16%. In other words, this program isn't just helping the groups that conservative rhetoric often blames or stereotypes. It's helping millions of white, rural, and working-class families who believed Donald Trump when he said he'd fight for them. So, when those benefits stopped, it wasn't just urban Democrats or liberals feeling the heat. It was the people wearing red hats and waving flags, too. And that's exactly what D.L. Hughley was calling out. He wasn't mocking poverty, he was pointing at hypocrisy. He said, that word disproportionately won't mean a thing when you're freezing and hungry. Then he added a line that cut deep. If heating subsidies aren't renewed, and if SNAP benefits disappear around Thanksgiving, there won't have been this many cold and hungry white people since the Pilgrims landed, and this time there won't be any Indians to bail you out.
Wanted him to win. More people that are supportive of him will be hurt than other people. That word disproportionately ain't gonna matter when you're freezing and cold. As a matter of fact, if the heating subsidies are not renewed, and if SNAP benefits out there around Thanksgiving, there won't have been this many cold and hungry white people since the Pilgrims landed here. Since Plymouth Rock. And this time, ain't gonna be no Indians to bail you out.
Thanks to the Democrats, I may not get food stamps next month.
You could almost hear the collective gasp across social media. Some laughed, others raged, but everyone listened. Before we go deeper, make sure you stay till the end, because what happens next, a viral video, angry MAGA voters, and a daycare food bank reveals just how far this crisis really reached. After DL's post went viral, the debate blew up. Trump supporters accused him of being divisive. Others said he was just exposing an ugly truth. Meanwhile, people across the country started sharing stories of how the shutdown was hitting them personally. One father filmed himself outside his toddler's daycare, holding back tears. He said, "My toddler's daycare just opened a food bank in the lobby because his classmates might not be able to eat." Imagine that, daycares turning into food banks because families can't afford lunchboxes anymore. That clip spread fast, and DL reshared it saying, "We're not feeding the babies we already have, so why does the government want more?" That single sentence summed up the heartbreak of it all. While people online argued about who was to blame, Republicans, Democrats, or the president, one thing was clear. Millions of Americans were about to go without food assistance, and holidays were around the corner. And when D.L. Hughley said, "I hope MAGA can fill their bellies with hate this holiday season," it wasn't just a joke, it was a bitter truth wrapped in humor. The kind of humor that makes you laugh, but also makes you think about the bigger picture. But what made DL's message sting even more was the timing. He posted his video right after Donald Trump gave a speech about the shutdown, blaming Democrats for caring more about illegal aliens and gender surgeries than about feeding mothers and children. That message hit hard in conservative media. They ran with it. Yet behind the soundbites, thousands of ordinary Trump voters were sitting at kitchen tables staring at empty cupboards. DL simply held up a mirror and said, "Look at what your vote brought you." Don't go anywhere, because we're about to talk about the deeper meaning behind DL's words and how he's been warning America about this same problem for years. D.L. Hughley isn't just a comedian. He's one of the original kings of comedy, a group that included Cedric the Entertainer, Steve Harvey, and Bernie Mac. But beyond the stage, D.L. has evolved into a voice of conscience. On his radio show and interviews, he often mixes comedy with hard truth, breaking down how racism, class, and politics collide. This moment with Snap was just the latest example of him turning headlines into a reality check. He's always said that politics isn't about party colors, it's about power and who gets left behind. And when you listen to him now, you can feel the frustration in his voice. It's not just about Trump, it's about America constantly ignoring the warning signs. For years, DL's been saying that hate politics doesn't feed people, it just starves everyone equally. And watching MAGA voters go through what Black and brown communities have faced for decades, government neglect, lost benefits, and cold winters, he couldn't help but point out the irony. As more news came in, you could see how chaotic it got. Some Trump supporters took to social media in disbelief, saying things like, "Thanks to the Democrats, I may not get food stamps next month." Their confusion went viral because even though they blamed Democrats, most government control at the time was actually in Republican hands. It was the same story D.L. Hughley had been warning America about: people voting for leaders who convince them their pain is someone else's fault. So while the blame game exploded online, families were lining up at churches, community centers, and yes, even daycares, hoping for donated meals. Meanwhile, DL kept doubling down, saying hate doesn't heat homes. And he wasn't lying. As reports came out, heating subsidies were also frozen because of the same government gridlock. Winter was coming fast, and politics wasn't keeping anyone warm. Stay with me here because the part that's coming next might surprise you. This isn't just a story about Trump and SNAP, it's a lesson about how America repeats its own mistakes. By the 27th day of the shutdown, news outlets were reporting the ripple effect. Grocery stores in rural areas started noticing fewer customers using EBT cards. Local economies slowed down because those benefits actually fuel small-town spending. Food banks in states like Alabama, Ohio, and Kentucky were overrun. Ironically, those are states that voted heavily Republican. The same communities that had rallied for the MAGA movement were now begging for emergency food assistance. That's when D.L. Hughley's words started to sound less like jokes and more like prophecy. Let's not forget, poverty doesn't care who you voted for. Hunger doesn't check your political party. And the truth that DL was pointing out, in his own unfiltered way, is that the moment we start believing cruelty is power, we all lose something. He saw that coming long before most did.
Now here's where the story takes a twist. Remember that viral Trump supporter blaming Democrats? After his video blew up, Democrats responded in the comments, not with anger, but with confusion. One person wrote, "I feel bad for this guy. He doesn't understand what's really happening." And that comment summed it all up. So much misinformation, so much division, that even the people most affected didn't realize who was pulling the strings. And if you've made it this far, stay till the end, because the ending message here is one every American needs to hear, no matter what side they're on. D.L. Hughley didn't make that Instagram post just to troll MAGA. He did it because he understands struggle. He knows what it's like to come from a community that has been stereotyped, neglected, and blamed for problems beyond its control. When he looks at Trump supporters losing SNAP benefits, he doesn't gloat, he warns. Because in his eyes, hate politics eventually eats its own. The system doesn't care if you're waving a red flag or a blue one. It only cares if you're useful to its agenda. The sad part is, while Americans fight each other online, the real issue, poverty, inequality, hunger, continues to grow. SNAP, the very program now frozen, was never a luxury. It was survival. It helped single mothers, veterans, seniors, and yes, even MAGA voters trying to make it through tough times. When that safety net disappears, nobody wins. And maybe that's what D.L. Hughley wanted to say all along. Not just "I told you so," but wake up. Because when the lights go out and the heat's off and there's no food on the table, all the slogans and rallies in the world won't keep anyone full. As days passed, the shutdown dragged on. Politicians made speeches, TV networks argued, and millions waited. Families called their caseworkers only to hear, "We don't have any updates." That hopelessness spread faster than any political talking point. Meanwhile, DL's quote, "Fill your bellies with hate this holiday season," echoed across timelines. Some hated it. Others called it the most brutally honest thing anyone had said all year. Now here's the truth. What happened with SNAP wasn't just a random glitch. It was a reflection of how fragile the system really is. It showed that one disagreement in Washington can starve millions. And that's the part D.L. Hughley kept hammering home. He's not saying that one party's evil and the other's perfect. He's saying both sides use the poor as pawns. But only one side keeps pretending that suffering is a choice. As the weeks went by, food lines grew longer. Churches held emergency drives. Volunteers filled boxes with peanut butter, canned beans, and rice. And somewhere in that chaos, DL's video kept circulating, turning into a symbol not of hate, but of truth spoken through humor. People who once dismissed him as just a comedian started quoting him. His words had become the caption for a crisis. Now by now you might be wondering, did anything change? Did the government fix it? Well, eventually funds were scrambled together to restore partial SNAP payments, but the damage had been done. Trust was broken. The lesson was clear. When people vote out of anger instead of empathy, they end up starving the very communities they thought they were protecting. So as you sit here watching this, maybe you agree with D.L. Hughley, maybe you don't. But either way, the message stands. Hate might win an election, but it can't fill a plate. And if we keep letting leaders divide us over who deserves help, one day there won't be any help left for anyone. That's the real warning here. And just before we close, here's a thought to take with you. When DL said that line about cold and hungry white people since the Pilgrims, he wasn't mocking history, he was reminding us that history repeats itself. Every time America chooses division over compassion, somebody goes hungry. Every time we let anger drive policy, children end up paying the price. The faces might change, but the story doesn't. So the next time you hear a politician say that cutting programs will teach people responsibility, remember this moment, the SNAP shutdown, the daycare food banks, the families praying for benefits that never came. Remember D.L. Hughley's words and ask yourself who really benefits from keeping us divided, because while we fight, they feast. If you made it all the way here, thank you for staying till the end. You've seen how comedy can turn into truth and how one man's viral post opened a window into what's really happening in this country. Don't forget to share your thoughts below because the conversation doesn't end here. Whether you agree with D.L. Hughley or not, one thing is clear. America has a hunger problem that politics alone can't fix. And maybe, just maybe, listening to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the first step towards feeding more than just our stomachs. It's the first step towards feeding our sense of humanity again.
And as we come to the end of this story, it's hard not to think about what this moment says about where we are as a country. We live in a time where some people would rather watch others suffer than admit they were wrong. But hunger doesn't care about pride. It humbles everyone the same way. That's what D.L. Hughley was really trying to show. Behind the jokes, behind the sting of his words, there was a warning that you can't build a country on resentment and expect it to feed you back. Hate might win applause at a rally, but it can't put groceries in your cart when the system collapses. D.L. has seen that truth up close. Growing up in Los Angeles, he knew what it felt like to live on the edge, to see communities crumble while politicians make speeches about strength. So when he talks about struggle, he's not looking down from a high place, he's speaking from the ground up. And that's why his message hits differently. He's not just talking about the poor, he's talking to them, for them, and sometimes even as them. It's empathy turned into activism through laughter. Think about this. Every Thanksgiving, people gather around tables filled with food, praying for blessings. But this year, thousands couldn't do that. They were praying for the lights to stay on, for a meal to appear, for a promise to be kept. Families had to tell their kids, "We'll make do," because the government couldn't make up its mind. And somewhere out there, D.L. Hughley's words were echoing in their heads. Fill your bellies with hate. Not as mockery, but as a reflection of the cruel irony of it all. As news anchors moved on to other stories, those families were still living the aftermath. Grocery shelves in smaller towns stayed half empty. Local stores that relied on SNAP customers had to cut hours or close. Teachers reported that more kids were showing up hungry. Churches kept their pantries open late. Nobody was untouched. It wasn't just a political problem anymore. It was human. And yet, in the middle of all that pain, something incredible happened. Strangers began helping each other again. People who once argued about politics were now standing side by side at food drives, handing out bags of rice and canned goods. You could feel a quiet shift, a small reminder that compassion still exists even when systems fail. Maybe that's what DL wanted people to see, that no matter what side you're on, there's always room to choose kindness over cruelty. Think about this. Every Thanksgiving, people gather around tables filled with food, praying for blessings. But this year, thousands couldn't do that. They were praying for the lights to stay on, for a meal to appear, for a promise to be kept. Families had to tell their kids, "We'll make do," because the government couldn't make up its mind.
And somewhere out there, D.L. Hugley's words were echoing in their heads. Fill your bellies with hate, not as mockery, but as a reflection of the cruel irony of it all. As news anchors moved on to other stories, those families were still living the aftermath. Grocery shelves in smaller towns stayed half empty. Local stores that relied on SNAP customers had to cut hours or close. Teachers reported that more kids were showing up hungry. Churches kept their pantries open late. Nobody was untouched. It wasn't just a political problem anymore. It was human. And yet in the middle of all that pain, something incredible happened. Strangers began helping each other again. People who once argued about politics were now standing side by side at food drives, handing out bags of rice and canned goods. You could feel a quiet shift, a small reminder that compassion still exists even when systems fail. Maybe that's what DL wanted people to see, that no matter what side you're on, there's always room to choose kindness over cruelty. Think about this. D.L. Hugley isn't perfect. He knows that. He's been criticized, misunderstood, even canceled a few times. But through it all, he's remained one of the few voices willing to call things exactly as they are. Not because he enjoys controversy, but because he believes truth is worth the discomfort. Every word he said about the SNAP shutdown came from that place. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't dance around it. He looked straight into the camera and told America to stop pretending hate doesn't come with a cost. And that's what makes the story powerful. It's not just about losing food stamps. It's about losing connection to each other, to empathy, to what it means to care. DL's words weren't just comedy. They were a challenge to the conscience of a nation that sometimes forgets what struggle looks like. Donald Trump may have been the name tied to this shutdown, but he wasn't the only one responsible. The blame belongs to every politician who treats working people like bargaining chips. It belongs to every voice that says they instead of we. And that's the line DL refused to cross. He turned pain into punchlines, not to shame the suffering, but to shake the powerful. Because when laughter fades, truth remains. And truth always wins in the end. Imagine if we lived in a world where people listened before they laughed, helped before they judged, and voted not for ego, but for empathy. That's the world DL keeps pushing for, even through his humor. That's why his message keeps resurfacing, because it's rooted in something timeless. You can almost hear him saying it again in that unmistakable voice. This ain't about politics, it's about people. And he's right, because when the programs stop, when the checks don't come, when the shelves go empty, it's not politicians who suffer, it's the single mom, the veteran, the retired couple, the child who doesn't understand why dinner isn't ready. Those are the faces behind the numbers. So as we close the story, remember what D.L. Hugley said, not as a joke, but as a truth bomb. Hate doesn't fill bellies. Division doesn't keep homes warm. Anger doesn't feed the babies we already have. Only compassion can do that. Only unity can do that. Only love can rebuild what greed keeps breaking. And maybe that's the real moral here. We can debate all we want, but at the end of the day, we either rise together or fall apart. It's that simple. D.L. Hugley may have delivered it with a comedian's timing, but the message is pure reality. If we keep feeding hate, we'll all starve. If we start feeding hope, we might just heal. So, as you sit with this story tonight, think about what kind of country you want to be part of. One that mocks the hungry, or one that feeds them? One that points fingers, or one that joins hands? Because no matter who you are, the struggle doesn't stop at your door forever. Sooner or later, everyone feels the effects of the choices we make as a nation. DL just happened to say it louder and sooner than most. If you've watched until the end, thank you, because that means you're not afraid of the truth. Keep that same energy, keep thinking, keep questioning, and most of all, keep caring. Because while hate might echo for a moment, compassion echoes forever. And that right there is what D.L. Hugley wanted us all to remember. Donald Trump may have been the name tied to this shutdown, but he wasn't the only one responsible. The blame belongs to every politician who treats working people like bargaining chips. It belongs to every voice that says they instead of we.
And that's the line DL refused to cross. He turned pain into punchlines, not to shame the suffering, but to shake the powerful. Because when laughter fades, truth remains, and truth always wins in the end. Imagine if we lived in a world where people listened before they laughed, helped before they judged, and voted not for ego, but for empathy. That's the world DL keeps pushing for, even through his humor. That's why his message keeps resurfacing, because it's rooted in something timeless. You can almost hear him saying it again in that unmistakable voice. This ain't about politics, it's about people. And he's right, because when the programs stop, when the checks don't come, when the shelves go empty, it's not politicians who suffer. It's the single mom, the veteran, the retired couple, the child who doesn't understand why dinner isn't ready. Those are the faces behind the numbers. So as we close this story, remember what D.L. Hughley said, not as a joke, but as a truth bomb. Hate doesn't fill bellies. Division doesn't keep homes warm. Anger doesn't feed the babies we already have. Only compassion can do that. Only unity can do that. Only love can rebuild what greed keeps breaking. And maybe that's the real moral here. We can debate all we want, but at the end of the day, we either rise together or fall apart. It's that simple. D.L. Hughley may have delivered it with the comedian's timing, but the message is pure reality. If we keep feeding hate, we'll all starve. If we start feeding hope, we might just heal. So as you sit with this story tonight, think about what kind of country you want to be part of. One that mocks the hungry, or one that feeds them? One that points fingers, or one that joins hands? Because no matter who you are, the struggle doesn't stop at your door forever. Sooner or later, everyone feels the effects of the choices we make as a nation. D.L. Hughley just happened to say it louder and sooner than most. If you've watched until the end, thank you, because that means you're not afraid of the truth. Keep that same energy. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and most of all, keep caring. Because while hate might echo for a moment, compassion echoes forever.
When you really think about it, what happened here wasn't just a one-time shutdown. It was a wake-up call. D.L. Hughley didn't have to say much more. His words had already started traveling farther than any politician's speech that month. Clips of his commentary popped up everywhere, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even TikTok. People were reacting from all sides. Some said, he's right, hate won't feed you. Others were furious, accusing him of being insensitive. But no matter which side they were on, everyone was talking. And that's what DL always wanted, to make people think, even if it makes them uncomfortable. As the days passed, a new kind of silence started spreading. It wasn't just the silence of empty refrigerators, it was the silence of realization that the people they trusted to protect them weren't really protecting anyone. Families who once believed the government had their back began to see the cracks for themselves. The same folks who used to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, were now realizing those straps can snap pretty fast when the system stops working. DL kept posting, not jokes this time, reflections. He shared a quote that read, "When the poor fight each other, the rich rest easy." Underneath it, he wrote, "And that's why they keep us divided." It wasn't funny, but it was real. The comment section filled with people from every background admitted they'd never thought about it that way. That's the kind of power truth has when it's spoken without filters. Don't click away yet, because what happened next showed how one comedian's words turned into something bigger, something that touched people far beyond politics. A few weeks later, a group of volunteers in Detroit started a food drive inspired by DL's message. They called it Feed, Don't Hate. No signs, no speeches, no political slogans, just food, compassion, and a message that we're all in this together. Videos of that drive went viral, showing strangers handing out meals to strangers, no questions asked. It was like people suddenly realized that waiting for politicians to fix everything was pointless. They decided to do it themselves. And that's exactly what DL had been hoping for. Action, not just argument. By the time the government finally restored the benefits, It wasn't the same country anymore. Something had shifted. People started questioning the headlines. They began asking, who benefits when we're divided? They started seeing that the stories they were told about who deserves help and who doesn't were just tools to keep them distracted. And in that shift, DL's message hit even harder. Because while some were still angry about his tone, others understood that his tone was the whole point. The truth isn't always polite. Sometimes it needs to sting before it heals. As the winter rolled into the new year, reports came out showing how much damage the shutdown had caused. Food insecurity had skyrocketed. Rural areas, the same ones that had been promised economic revival, were hit the hardest. Gas prices were up, heating bills were up, and SNAP users were still playing catch-up. But politicians were already on to their next fight, acting like the crisis had been solved. Meanwhile, families were still struggling quietly. That's when DL went live again. Sitting in front of a microphone, he spoke directly to his audience. "Look," he said, "I know some of y'all are mad at me for what I said, but if the truth makes you mad, maybe it's because deep down you know it's true. This ain't about left or right. This is about right and wrong." His voice was calm, but it carried weight. He wasn't mocking anyone, he was challenging them. You could almost feel the frustration, but also the compassion behind it. He didn't want people to stay angry. He wanted them to wake up. And in that moment, the laughter stopped, replaced with quiet nods. Even those who disagreed couldn't ignore the facts anymore. The government shutdown had shown everyone how fragile security can be when leaders care more about winning arguments than feeding people. As his live ended, thousands flooded the comments, thanking him for saying what they couldn't. Some said they had voted for Trump, but now realized things weren't as simple as they thought. Others said they'd never seen anyone use comedy to open eyes like this before. DL didn't respond to most comments. He didn't need to. The message had already done its job. So what does all this mean for the rest of us? It means we can't keep looking at hunger, poverty, or injustice as someone else's problem. When a government shuts down, when SNAP runs dry, it doesn't just hurt them. It hurts everyone. It weakens the whole foundation of what's supposed to hold a nation together. You know, DL often talks about his comedy heroes, Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory, and Paul Mooney, men who use laughter to tell hard truths. And watching him handle this moment, it's clear he learned from them well. Just like Gregory and Pryor, he didn't use his platform to entertain power. He used it to question it. That's why his words cut so deep. They come from a tradition of comedians who cared enough to be honest. Now imagine being one of those SNAP families right before Thanksgiving. No benefits, no assurance, no clear answers. Imagine standing in a grocery store, counting what's left on your card, realizing it's zero. That kind of pain doesn't care about politics. It humbles everyone. And maybe that's why DL's message stuck, because it wasn't just funny, it was human. So when he said, "I hope MAGA can fill their bellies with hate this holiday season," it wasn't cruelty, it was irony. The kind that forces a nation to face its reflection. He wasn't laughing at poor people, he was laughing at the system that convinced poor people to blame each other while the real culprits keep eating well. Stick with me till the very end because the last part of this story carries the deepest truth. Months later, the conversation hadn't died down. Journalists began writing think pieces about what DL had said. Some called him too harsh, others called him a prophet with a punchline. And while the world moved on to other headlines, his message lingered. It became a sort of quiet echo, a reminder that we can't separate compassion from justice. One night during a stand-up set in Chicago, DL brought the subject up again. He looked out at the audience and said, "Y'all ever notice how hate always comes back home? You can send it out in the world, but one day it shows up on your doorstep." The crowd went silent, then burst into applause. That was his genius, turning truth into rhythm, pain into punchlines. And maybe that's what America needs more of right now. Not louder arguments, but louder honesty. Not pointing fingers, but holding mirrors. Because if this story taught us anything, it's that nobody wins when the people at the bottom are left to fight over crumbs. By now, you've seen how deep this story goes. It's not just about food stamps or Trump or one viral post. It's about a system that keeps proving D.L. Hughley right again and again. And if we're ever going to fix it, we'll have to start listening not to politicians, but to truth tellers, even the funny ones. So before you click away, take this moment in. Ask yourself what kind of country you want to live in. One that feeds hate or one that feeds people. Because in the end, that's the choice we're all making, whether we realize it or not. D.L. Hughley may have used humor, but his message was deadly serious. Hunger doesn't care who you voted for. Cold doesn't check your skin color. And pain doesn't stop at party lines. The only thing that can fix this is compassion. Not just for ourselves, but for each other. If you've stayed this long, thank you, because that means you care. You've listened not just with your ears, but with your heart. So keep that same energy. Keep questioning, keep thinking, keep holding power accountable. Because the moment we stop caring, the moment we stop speaking truth, that's when the hate finally wins. And D.L. Hughley's right. You can't fill your belly with hate. It might burn for a while, but it won't keep you warm. Only love, empathy, and unity can do that.